So while many United States citizens are focused on the upcoming US presidential election, the Venezuelan presidential election just ended, leading to many suspicions from US statesmen and Venezuelan migrants within the United States. Out of the over 21 million eligible voters in Venezuelan elections, between 3.5 million to 5 million live in other countries, namely the United States, other Latin American countries, and Spain. Now, that 25% of the eligible voter population was largely unable to register to vote in this election due to new laws put in place by the Venezuelan government to almost completely bar Venezuelans abroad from voting. Following this election, which pitted the widely unpopular Nicolas Maduro against Edmundo González Urrutia, both Maduro and González claimed victory. Here's Maduro.
I am Nicolas Maduro Moro, re-elected president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Thanks for defending our democracy, our laws, and our people.
And here's Maria Corina Machado, a leader of the opposition party and close advisor to González.
They kept it together. They didn't go to the opening ceremony. How smart and mature was that to do? And they stayed in their own lane.
The end will be the truth coming through and the respect for the popular sovereignty that was expressed today, and which chose Edmundo González Urrutia as the next president of Venezuela.
Both of those sounds were from the New York Times. Just yesterday, the National Electoral Council claimed that Maduro had won with 51% of the votes, but many local Latin American countries and superpowers abroad worldwide have waited to recognize those results. Many Venezuelans have fled their country because of harsh political and economic environments put in place by Maduro's government. And many election monitors abroad have said that the barring of these voters is equivalent to widespread election fraud, as those nearly 25% of voters would theoretically vote in opposition to Maduro. Some of those Venezuelan migrants live within New York City and also face difficulties in trying to register to vote, or refuse to even try, knowing that the rules that the Venezuelan government put in place leading up to this election. Today, WRHU's Morning Wake-Up Call is joined by Irina Zuckerman, a U.S. national security and human rights lawyer and geopolitical analyst. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Zuckerman.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
So I'd first like to ask, when it comes to this election, what role does Venezuela and the Maduro government in general play in affecting the South American region, and how can these election results impact that further?
In some ways, Venezuela is a bellwether of political change in Latin America. In other ways, it is a shaper of policies. It's at one point was a very prosperous country. It had more oil than Saudi Arabia. It was considered one of the main energy trading partners, sources of imports of oil for the United States. But decades of destructive policies and authoritarianism have turned it into essentially a failed state where the middle class has been decimated, where millions of people have been forced to flee abroad for economic or human rights reasons, and where increasingly there is a crackdown on any sort of political freedom. And more importantly, Venezuelans military and intelligence are backed by Cuba, which in turn is very closely affiliated with Russia, China, and Iran. So these state actors, which have been playing an increasing and growing role in South America, are using Venezuela as a sort of proxy to spread influence across the region. So you will frequently find Venezuela-associated intelligence networks operating in other countries, creating foundations for similar political turns in other Latin American countries, and closely associating with cartels and in other undemocratic regimes as well.
It's Antonio speaking now. Thank you for joining us here, Irina. I want to now talk about the United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken actually spoke out in a press conference urging that all votes, both national and international, be properly counted to ensure a safe and fair election result. Now, Edmundo González Urrutia, his camp has already called the results unfair and unjust. So is there any chance that there's foul play going on here, or are the results that we're seeing the actual results that were sent in?
There's no chance that this election hasn't been stolen. In fact, the hilarious, and no one is commenting on this. When Maduro's team announced the results, the total added up to the unbelievable 109%, which is obviously an indication that someone messed up with the math in creating the final numbers. Meanwhile, the opposition came out with evidence showing that at 73% of the tallied votes, they were ahead. So the numbers claiming otherwise have been obviously fabricated.
So in the sense that these numbers are fabricated, what is the next steps moving forward? Because it seems as if Maduro already has taken the official claim to win. He had an entire he spoke to the nation yesterday. But my question now here is what happens going forward? How does this get reversed? How does democracy win out in this case?
A lot will depend on the United States. In fact, we are seeing a repetition of similar events that have happened in the past few years in Iran. There's already a gathering storm. We're seeing protests breaking out on the streets in Venezuela with masses of people disputing the election results. The only three countries to recognize the outcome were Russia, China, and Iran, all of which are supporters of the Maduro regime and direct benefactors of his policies. Everyone else condemned it, so there's zero international legitimacy to Maduro making these claims. There's zero domestic legitimacy given that people are rallying on the streets and producing evidence that the election results are fraudulent. Even the Communist Party, which previously endorsed and supported Maduro, is beginning to side with some of the protesters, which indicates that they are not sure about the final outcome of all of this, and they're not willing to put all their eggs in one basket. So a couple of things are likely to happen in the next few days. The protests are going to probably grow and put more pressure on the regime to respond to the claims and to call for a transparent international investigation. Maduro has various choices in how to react. He can try to wait it out. He can try to come up with explanations, engage the opposition in some sort of discussion. After all, he was promised the lifting of U.S. sanctions if the election was transparent and fair, and he took full advantage of that and did not deliver. But he can also go in a more authoritarian direction, and he can try to enforce obscure laws to break up the protests. If they persist, he can use force, even deadly force, as has happened in Iran and other countries recently, and that can lead to chaos, international condemnations, reimpositions of sanctions. If Venezuela is isolated enough as a result of these claims, can there be an internal coup that will cause Maduro to have to flee the country? Will the military and the intelligence services decide that propping him up is just not worth the effort and side with the opposition? It's not clear. It could really go either way at this point, or Maduro can be wise, can manipulate the situation, can selectively allow some protests to continue, and then use measures that are not necessarily violent but manipulative, such as taking down the internet, trying to buy off and divide sections of the opposition against each other, which he has successfully done in the past, and essentially curtail the protests before they get out of hand. Regardless, Maduro for now is being propped up by the military, so the answer will also lie with the military. Where they go, that is what is going to happen. And Venezuela, while already is increasingly criticized and isolated internationally, has also been taking advantage of the various steps of appeasement and compromise that U.S. has tried to put forward to resolve diplomatically the differences. So, of course, a lot will then depend on the US, whether they will try to negotiate with the military to back down from supporting Maduro, promising, amnesty and immunity for past wrongs, whether they will promise them a role in the new government, whether they will back the protesters openly, and whether they will be willing to give protesters something more than merely moral support, because that has not really worked out well the last time the opposition tried to stage an overturn of elections. The US made promises but ultimately did not commit to anything in particular, and so there was no real strong political backing for the opposition, and Maduro won easily. Now the case is different. Now we are seeing that the elections are openly fraudulent. It's not merely the case of the opposition being divided and not having enough support. They clearly won on their own, but will US take advantage of this opportunity to provide additional pressure and support and create a path for them to be able to actually take power into their hands politically? That remains to be seen, and right now the climate is extremely uncertain. The statements coming out of the State Department have not been reassuring in the sense that while they condemned the fraud, they have not particularly promised any concrete measures in response to Maduro's violations.
Jack Freddy here for WRHU. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So, this will be Maduro's third 6-year term, yet it seems as if many Venezuelans in the US and even in Spain have not been so pleased. And while those within the mainland were torn between happy and melancholy emotions, I'm curious, why is there such a difference between the international Venezuelans, the way they're feeling, and those who are currently living in the country?
Well, unfortunately, the Venezuelans living in the country are not particularly free to express their opinions, and the Venezuelans abroad, many of them are quite dissatisfied with the outcome. They were obviously hoping for something different to happen, but it's not to say that everyone who left the country did so for reasons of freedom and democracy. Some have left for entirely economic reasons, and many of them supported people who had different claims to Maduro. Actually had pretty similar policies. So the issue is not necessarily with the political lack of political freedom, but with the economic mismanagement and corruption. It's not to say that the overwhelming majority of people doesn't want him gone, but a lot of people have been opposed to him for different reasons. It's not a monolith reason for criticizing his regime. And some people are also careful about expressing their opinions because they have families remaining in Venezuela, and so they are concerned that if their public reactions are excessively critical of Maduro in the election results, they will not, their family members and friends can suffer for that. Finally, there is some truth to the fact that not everyone trusts the opposition. There's a long history of the opposition being controlled, split, manipulated, or simply divided and ineffective. So there's a lot of skepticism about what comes after if Maduro does fall.
Good morning. My name is Brenda Fernandez. Now, one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, what does this current election mean in terms of dictatorship and specifically the geopolitical climate of Latin America?
Well, interestingly enough, unlike previous elections where there's appeared to be some level of legitimacy for Maduro, however horrible the policies and the outcome here, it is becoming increasingly clear that his level of authoritarianism has crossed the lines of outright election meddling and co-optation, the fact that he has no popular support, no institutional support, and has to steal the elections in order to remain in power. And the next step after that, down the ladder of less and less legitimacy is the use of force to retain power. If the protests do not stop or grow sufficiently riotous and out of hand. What that means for the U.S., of course, is increasing instability not only in Venezuela but all over South America. Because whenever there is this sort of a conflict between a regime and its people, the containment of results is hard to predict. Will this break out into some sort of a civil unrest or an uprising? Will there be a mass flood of refugees as a result of crackdowns by the government? Will this mean that other countries and friendly regimes to Maduro could get involved and send their own forces to support the regime against any uprisings? A lot of this can also provide a chaotic opportunity for bad actors, terrorist organizations, other regimes to infiltrate, to take advantage, to stage attacks even on the U.S., to send in people over the border that present a security threat to the U.S. So there are many opportunities that can go seriously awry depending on how it's handled.
Thank you so much. This is Cameron Bowden once again. My question sort of stems from how is this election going to impact those Venezuelans who had to flee their countries and who are now living abroad in other countries, other Latin American countries, the US, Spain? What is this election going to do to them?
I think they're watching it closely to see if this could be the beginning of the end for Maduro and maybe a beginning of some transition process to a less authoritarian system. I'm not sure that it will necessarily bring about a better, significant and rapid improvement, but it could bring an opposition that is less authoritarian, more amenable to negotiations with other parties, more inclusive and more open to cooperation with the U.S. and other pro-Western countries in the region. I think many of them are hoping for some sort of an opening of that sort in order to be able to at least come back to visit their families, have better and easier communication, be able to benefit from a situation and see the country restored to some level of international legitimacy. But I think we are still a far cry from there. For now, there's actually a moment of danger for Venezuelans abroad. I think many of them feel they need to be extra careful because when the regime is threatened with a possibility of a fall, this is when they become more paranoid, more aggressive, when they start sending out surveillance and intimidation against diasporas abroad, perhaps with the help of the Russians, Iranians, and the Chinese, and where even people who are not really activists on the front line of the human rights defenses and the political change, but who are merely critical of the current developments, they could themselves find themselves with the repercussions and the expansion of this authoritarianism even abroad.
Irina, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the Morning Wake Up Call. Your time means a lot to us, and thank you for taking time out of your morning to enlighten us a little bit.
I appreciate the opportunity. It was a great discussion. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.